Thanks for coming. Thanks for taking the time out of a Saturday afternoon to help address this economic and political crisis. Every one of you will be asked over the course of this event to take up a broader responsibility in this coming period. The historical crisis has never been so severe. The historical opportunity has never been so great. And we have to seize the moment. As Friedrich Schiller had said, will a great moment find a little people? It is up to the people in this room to inspire a fundamental shift in the American people today, to transform what we are as a nation back to what we always intended to be, and to set that standard for the world. So, on that opening, let me introduce a very special guest, Harley Schlanger. He has worked with Lyndon LaRouche for a number of decades. He has led the fight in California specifically for decades. And he has a very, very clear foresight of not only the nature of the crisis, but also how we can get out of this crisis and where mankind should go. So let me introduce Harley.
I have a few things to cover today, but I want to begin by talking about the appropriateness of the musical offering we just heard. There are two parts to it. First of all, the national anthem. We're in a fight to save our nation. This is not just singing about how much we love the flag and how much we care about our country. If we care about the country, we have to realize that our country is in grave danger. We have a president who's an agent of a foreign power, who's out to destroy this nation. You know, some people say Obama, he's a Muslim, he's a socialist. Would that he were a Muslim or a socialist. He's a fascist who's operating on behalf of the British Empire, our historic enemy. And I'll develop some of that by going through the difference between what Franklin Roosevelt did when he came in under a very serious depression and what Obama did instead when he came in 2009. So the national anthem is, I hope that people who, I see some of you who salute and really get shivers. It's thinking about what it means, but then acting on it. That's why we presented that. But the other piece is very interesting. It's from Johann Sebastian Bach's B minor Mass, which is an ecumenical piece. Bach himself was Protestant. The Mass is a Catholic Mass. Bach lived in a period less than 100 years after a brutal period of warfare in which literally millions of people were killed and displaced in Europe in a war between Christians, Protestants versus Catholics. Religious warfare is one of the oldest tools used to defend empires. If you can get people fighting over how many fingers you may use to make the sign of the cross, or over Islam versus Judaism, both of which are religions that come from the same basic book, if you can get people to kill each other in the name of religion, then that's a society that won't survive. And what Bach did, coming after the 30 Years' War, after the Great Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which ended the 30 Years' War, which is really just a part of 150 years of religious warfare in Europe. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 said, we live for the benefit of the other. Isn't that what Christianity is about? Isn't that what religion is about? We see in everyone the image and likeness of God. And if we see that, the question then is, if we all have that innate capability, how do you organize society to allow that to emerge? And that's what the nation state is all about. That the principles of our nation, the United States, represent principles which essentially start from the idea that governments are instituted to defend the general welfare of ourselves and our posterity. And so with Bach, in this beautiful piece of music, what Bach was communicating to the people of his day, many of whom had stories from grandparents and great-grandparents about the atrocities that occurred in the name of religion, to appeal to that higher sense of dignity in man and also that sense of responsibility that we have for the other. And Bach's piece and his efforts, his life, were designed to take ordinary churchgoers and give them this on a Sunday. Not some set of rules that will get you to heaven and give you eternal life, even if you've been a sinner all your life. But actually to give you a sense of that divine potential that exists in all of us. Now, I'm going to, in addition to going through the FDR versus Obama, I'm going to give you a sense at the end of why we have to go back to that kind of culture again. One of the reasons we elected Obama, and one of the reasons we have a bunch of Republicans who you put the whole Republican leadership together and they couldn't organize a two-car funeral procession. Why do we have leaders like that? Why do we elect such idiots and immoral, corrupt people? It's because we've become immoral and corrupt. We've bought into money, money, money. We believe that the purpose of life, and I'm hoping I'm not talking about you, but I'm sure all of you have an element of this. You got to get by. You got to protect yourself. You got to have some money. You got to have a 401k. Yes, I know the stock market bubble is a bubble, but I've got to get my share before it crashes. Isn't that what people think? How do you think people started refinancing a $250,000 home for $500,000? Some of you may have done that. Why do you do that? Because everybody's doing it. Because you can make some money. I don't want to miss out. This may be the one opportunity. That's what they're saying about the stock market right now. Sure, it's a bubble, but man, I could get rich. And you always hear the story about the guy who bought Apple Computer when it was $8 a share. You start saying that could be me. Starbucks, computer stock, all of this. This is the road to security and prosperity. It's the road to ruin. And I want to tell you, we had a very beautiful statement from the new Pope the other day. I'm sure you didn't hear it because I don't think it was covered in the United States. But he spoke against the cult of money. He said, money must not rule, but serve the economy. He said, we've turned ourselves into consumers with a price instead of living for some higher purpose. So the reason we start our meetings with music is not just to give you a nice harmonious opening, but because it's the principles of the greatest composers, of a Bach, of Haydn, of Mozart, people who followed in Bach's footsteps, Beethoven, Schumann, Schubert, Brahms. There aren't a lot of them. You can really recite the names of the good composers, one of whom has a 200th birthday this year, Giuseppe Verdi. But they were people who took a responsibility to create a culture in which we can see that divine potential in ourselves and others. And we don't have that today. We don't have that at all. Now, in spite of my saying that, let me tell you that we can redeem ourselves, we sinners. Because it's a moment of cautious optimism. What Lyndon LaRouche said today is that if we don't screw it up, and we might, but if we don't screw it up, and we don't let the Republicans get in the way, we can get Obama out of office. We can get Glass-Steagall in. And those two steps would put us a long way towards recovering not just what we've lost since 2008, but what we've lost as a nation and as a people since the assassination of John and Robert Kennedy in the 1960s. Because in all areas we've gone downhill since then. I know people with their smartphones say, well, they didn't have smartphones in 1968. Yeah, they actually talk to people. You walk down the street today, it's amazing. Everyone's walking like this, they bump into trees, they trip over people, and worse, they do that while they're driving. They're basically guided missiles.
GPS guided missiles.
And this is what we consider the greatness of our culture. 14 million people can watch two cats have sex on a piano while playing chopsticks on YouTube, and they think that's an improved culture. So this question of changing the culture and getting our country back on its feet is one and the same question. Now, just to begin with the optimism on this, Michael mentioned a couple of these points. We have the Obama scandals. Now, the media is caught off guard by this because they personally believe that Obama is the one. Much of the media bought into the line that this is the greatest speaker. Now, obviously, they've never been to a black church. There are plenty of people. When I used to run for office, I'd go and speak in black churches. They're much better than Obama. The typical black preacher gets people up dancing and cheering, and you leave church wanting to change, as opposed to looking at the preacher and saying, "Oh, he's so good," which is what Obama wants you to think. That's the narcissism. Now, what's happening now with these scandals is that the real nature of Obama is coming out. Namely, that he doesn't care about anybody but himself. He has no empathy for anybody but himself. You can't have empathy for people if you're walking around patting yourself on the back all the time. But what he's done as president is preside over a further destruction of our physical economy and a course toward war through an alliance with an Anglo-Saudi operation called jihadist terrorism. I'm not going to go through that in the course of the presentation today because we have on our website a beautiful report on Obama's de facto alliance with the jihadists. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up, though, is that we keep hearing about the Benghazi scandal. What did Hillary Clinton say? What did this one say? What did that one say? They're sort of missing the scandal. The scandal is that our government put a bunch of terrorists in power in Libya. And those terrorists are now the people we're trying to support in Syria, working together with the Saudis who ran 9/11. Now, that's the Benghazi scandal. And it's been covered up by the media, it's been covered up by the politicians, covered up by the Republicans who are really running an anti-Hillary in 2016 campaign. If we don't get Obama out soon, forget the 2016 elections. Here's an opportunity to remove Obama, and that's where we should be focused. But the scandals have opened the door. Look, the press looked at the AP scandal, and the press said, "Whoa, Obama's spying on us? We thought we were on his side." Now, the IRS scandal, here's the real story on this. Yes, they were giving Tea Party and other groups a hard time. The real story is the person who was overseeing this was just promoted, and she's now in charge of Obamacare's IRS operations to make sure that if you don't get overpriced, worthless insurance, you get hit with a fine that the IRS will collect. So the real scandal in the IRS is that we have a health care policy that's designed to kill the sick, the poor, and the elderly, and destroy doctors in the medical profession, and charity hospitals and public hospitals. And if you've got enough money, maybe you'll be able to get a private hospital. And if you really have enough money, you can buy an insurance policy that will cover nothing. So that's the IRS scandal. But Benghazi is the real deal, because the President of the United States is in an alliance with terrorists. Now, I'll add one other point to this. Why is it that the Republicans are so stupid on this? Well, do you remember what happened when there was a challenge to Obama's sending our fighter planes to enforce the no-fly zone in Libya, and he didn't go to the Congress? This was an act of war. Under the Constitution, only the Congress can authorize U.S. force deployment. And the President only can respond under the War Powers Act if we've been attacked. Did anyone in Libya attack the United States? So there was an uproar in Congress over this. And who put the uproar down in the Senate? John Kerry and John McCain. And McCain and Lindsey Graham and these self-righteous, pious, lying pieces of garbage defended Obama's Libyan operation, and now they're supporting terrorists in Syria. And they're going after Hillary Clinton. So when you look at the scandals, what you see is a potential. Now here's another scandal. We're not going to have enough food in the United States. We're destroying our agricultural system. They just voted to cut back on food stamps. Why are so many people on food stamps? You know the narrative. Oh, it's because people don't want to work and they want to get free food. You know, there are people who don't want to work, like most people who have jobs. Most of us do work because we want to make a living. There are some people who really don't want to work, who are freeloaders. But we've created a culture of non-productive freeloaders. You know who the biggest freeloaders are? Wall Street. They take your money and speculate and lose, and then they get you to pay for it with bailouts and with quantitative easing, and now with quantitative stealing. So I can go through a lot more on this if you want, on this question of the scandals. But the smell of Watergate is in the nostrils of some of the press, like Bob Woodward. Remember what happened to Woodward? He was the guy who exposed Watergate. And Woodward exposed something that was really simple, that Obama was behind sequestration. He's ranting and raving about the Republicans. It was his idea. And the Obama team, Gene Sperling in particular, threatened Woodward for exposing them. You couldn't get more Watergate than that. And Woodward came out and said, this is the paranoia like Nixon. Now the media says, oh, there's no Nixon moment here. It's the whole mentality. We're going to do what we want to do, and if you get in our way, we're going to cut you down. What's the real thing behind all these issues also? It's whistleblowers. People who are coming forward at a risk of career and life to say there's injustices, there's fraud, there's corruption. And Obama said, oh, we're going to be the most transparent administration ever. And they're persecuting whistleblowers. That's Watergate, the cover-up. You know, they usually get you on the cover-up. You know, Nixon, really a petty crime, Watergate. What did he go out on? Lying to the American people. The cover-up. And who were the people who ultimately got him out? There was some element of the establishment. The Republicans went in and said, Dick, you got to go. So the question is, when will the Democrats break with Obama? Now here's where the Glass-Steagall issue becomes interesting. Glass-Steagall is not just a banking policy. It's an approach to real economics. It's the idea that we do really have something called a real economy, where we produce something, not where we buy and sell each other's underwear back and forth and mark it up and do the laundry and things of that sort. We actually produce something. That's called the real economy, what LaRouche calls the physical economy. And the way you generate a surplus in society is you produce more than you consume. Now, if I'm going too fast and too complicated for you, let me know. Actually, this is not complicated at all. You produce more than you consume. That's how you expand the wealth of a society. Isn't that simple? Well, what are they telling us in Washington? We have to cut. Spending is the problem. But revenues have been sinking. The number of people working in production have been collapsing. We're at lower levels of manufacturing workers today than during the last depression. And more people are in non-productive areas of economics that aren't really economics, they're finance, real estate, insurance. So that's the problem with the economy. And we've seen it. We had a bubble in the 1990s that popped. You remember the dot-com bubble? You know, the idea that buying pig ears on the internet is going to be the next big thing. You know, pets.com, things like that. Where you have stocks that have nothing of value behind them. And then you start betting on whether those stocks are going up or down. You bet on commodity prices going up or down. You connect that to currency rates and so on. That's what's called derivatives, where you have financial instruments derived from something of value, but with no value in itself. We've got somewhere over $1 quadrillion worth of obligations on the books of banks in derivatives. Citibank itself has over 70 trillion. You realize that's 5 times the size of the US GDP? Now, if that popped, it wouldn't mean they need 70 trillion in bailouts, because a lot of these things are basically zero sums where they cancel each other out. But there is an estimate somewhere between 3 to 4 trillion would be needed to bail out one bank. JP Morgan Chase has just about the same amount. The Deutsche Bank has just about the same amount. Now, when 2008 happened, when the bubble popped in 2005 and 2006, and Lyndon LaRouche famously said in July 2007 that the banking system is finished. And he put forward a plan to deal with the foreclosure question and deal with the banking problem, which essentially was the Homeowner and Bank Protection Act, which called for writing down the bad assets and separating commercial banks from investment banks and let the investment bankers take their losses. That was modeled on what Franklin Roosevelt did, and I'll get to some specifics on that in a moment. At that point, instead, when in September 2008, Lehman Brothers popped, and they suddenly realized they were buying and selling things that were worthless. At 30 to 40 times the face value of the worthless entities. Lehman collapsed, the whole system was on the brink, and they came up with something called the Toxic Asset Relief Plan. And we were led to believe they were going to start writing down the bad debt. That's what they said. Instead, besides the $700 billion in the TARP funds, there have been trillions of dollars made available at almost no interest rates to the financial institutions. To do what? To allow them to keep these financial instruments on their books at face value. So a mortgage-backed security, which might include 20% of its value with being foreclosed homes, which means it's not worth its face value, is protected at face value because it's part of the asset of the bank. And so the Federal Reserve has been creating obligations in your name and your children's names and your grandchildren's names to allow the bankers not only to keep holding on to those assets, but to keep trading them using your 401ks to do it. And so your 401k looks like it's recovering a little bit. What's it recovering? Something on a computer with no value. And all you need is the sign of an inflation hitting in the real monetary system. They're going to jack interest rates up and the whole bubble's going to pop again. And it will be bigger than 2008. Now, that's why Glass-Steagall must be done. And I just want to draw this out a little bit more for a second. Because if this bubble pops again, they're not going to go for another bailout. They've already come up with a new policy, which is called the Cyprus template, called the bail-in. And what they say is if you have savings, deposits in a bank, that the bank needs a bailout, but the government's not going to bail it out, they can bail in. They can take your savings and deposits. And you say, but that's my money. You know what? It's not your money. Because the Dodd-Frank bill defines that as investments in the bank under Title II of Dodd-Frank. It wasn't just Cyprus. Cyprus was the guinea pig. Why do you think they were so freaked out about this tiny little island that most people know nothing about? That had 10 billion, 12 billion that they couldn't roll over anymore. Here we are talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars. And they went berserk over 10 billion because they wanted to do a test case. And what Dodd-Frank says is that when a bank resolution comes up, in other words, when a bank is bankrupt, and mostly they're still talking about the smaller banks, what they can do But they are talking also about the too big to fail banks. What they can do is take as much of the depositors' money as they can get away with. In Cyprus, 37.5% over 100,000 euros was granted. And they gave you stock in return in the bank that was already bankrupt, so they had to steal your money. Then another 22.5% was frozen, so that's 60% you have no access to anymore. It's not your money. The other 40% you can only take out a little bit at a time. So if you're running a business, you can't draw money to keep your business going. That's now legal for Bank of America, for Wells Fargo, for Citicorp, for any bank. In Europe, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to start stealing from the smaller banks under this idea of the banking union and give that money to the bigger banks, which in a sense has already gone on here because smaller banks can't get credit. That's why people can't get loans. Why you need a 14,000 credit score almost to be even allowed to have a cup of coffee at a bank. Because they don't have the money. The banks that want to invest in the real economy can't have access to it. Because Bernanke is saying we need the trillions to backstop the too big to fail. So that's why Glass-Steagall will work. And for those who didn't hear it, we've been fighting to get a bill in the Senate. We have 62 or 64 sponsors in the House. It's not enough. And after this meeting, we're going to discuss who in the Bay Area is not yet a sponsor, who needs to get their rear end kicked repeatedly until they add their name. But we finally got a Senate sponsor. It's an interesting case, Tom Harkin from Iowa, who's retiring after this year. Yeah, Wes is all excited. What took him so long? No, it's important. It's really important because now we have a senator. We also have 21 states which have introduced memorial resolutions calling on their congressional delegations to support Glass-Steagall. So we're on the verge of breakthroughs on impeachment and Glass-Steagall. Now, we didn't get there because Tom Harkin's a good guy. We got there because we've been mobilizing on a shoestring budget with a small organization with no media support, no institutional support to speak of. In fact, I'll tell you this, there's only one institution right now that's really working on your behalf, that's saving your ass. That's an institution called the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Because of General Martin Dempsey, we have not already been in a war. Because he's essentially stood in the way of Obama's desire to arm the Syrian rebels and bomb Iran. So for those of you who want to say a prayer for someone tonight who's doing something good, besides supporting us, it's General Dempsey. There's not much else out there. There are people being dragged kicking and screaming to support Glass-Steagall and to start looking at the corruption of Obama. Now, how did we have a different policy in the Depression? You know, a lot of people think Franklin Roosevelt had a Democratic Congress, he had all the support in the world. Well, he had Southern Democrats. I don't know how many of you know Southern Democrats. I've lived in the South since 1974. I know a lot about Southern Democrats. They're about as dumb as Republicans. They're corrupt. They're very much oriented toward local and regionalism. But also, to be perfectly honest, they were Dixiecrats. They were Confederates. They didn't want government to interfere. So how did FDR get them to support him? Well, he went over their heads to the American people, something called fireside chats. And then he went in and talked to them and said, look, your folks want what we're doing. What we're doing is a national recovery. So let me just give you a sense of what FDR did. Because this is important. People have to realize we have had a few good presidents who actually used the Constitution and the instruments of power on behalf of the people, not the bankers. And if we hadn't had a handful of good presidents, you know, George Washington as one, John Quincy Adams as another, the role of Hamilton as the first Treasury Secretary, Lincoln, McKinley, a lot of our best presidents were killed. John Kennedy was in this tradition. Franklin Roosevelt. What Roosevelt did when he first came in is he launched an attack on the bankers. He didn't go to Wall Street and say to them, look, we'll bail you out if someday you make credit available to all these poor people who've lost homes and jobs. In his inaugural address, he said, our greatest primary task is to put people to work. This is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously. It can be accomplished in part by direct recruiting by the government itself, treating the task as we would treat the emergency of war. Now, has President Obama treated the unemployment problem in the economy as though it were a war? Yeah, war against people, man. Now, what Roosevelt first did was stabilize the banking situation, and he did it with Glass-Steagall. He said that we're not going to allow bankers to take depositors' money and speculate. Glass-Steagall says there's an iron wall of separation. You can be a commercial bank, or a savings and loan, or an insurance company, or an investment bank, but you can't be more than one of those. Now, that policy worked very well for 50 years. They started chipping away at it in the 80s. People like Greenspan, people like Phil Gramm, who ultimately killed Glass-Steagall with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act in 1999. But for most of the time, from 1933 to the mid-1980s, we had separate banking. Were bankers impoverished in the 50s and 60s? Did they live in hovels? Did they have to go out and get second jobs? No, the banks did well because the economy was growing physically. Partly because of this banking policy, but also what else did FDR do? Well, he made cheap credit available. And some of this was through government programs. You know, when people complain about government, I just tell you this. The government is supposed to work for us. If it's not working for us, it's because we're not putting the right people in there, and we're not complaining when they do stupid things. By complaining, I don't mean sit down at a bar and complain to a buddy over a beer, and then go out and catch a ball game or go to a topless bar or something. I'm talking about organizing to get the government to represent you. And if it doesn't, then run for office. Or get a bunch of buddies and scare the hell out of the people who did run for office. That's what FDR did. When he talked about running the money changers out of the temple. That was also, I think, in his inaugural address, or maybe it was his Democratic acceptance speech. I think it was the inaugural address. What did he mean by that? Everybody knows what that means. It means you take the crooks and you don't let them steal anymore. You use the power of our government to protect people. His slogan was, we put people first. Not Wall Street, not insurance companies, not HMOs, not the pharmaceutical industry, not the grain cartels, not the oil companies. We put people first. It doesn't mean we have to have 25 government employees for every normal person. It means the government is supposed to take the regulations that it does to protect the people. So FDR made sure there was credit made available. In some cases, it was through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. In others, they set up new authorities, like the Tennessee Valley Authority. Now, the third thing he did was jobs through infrastructure. Now, we have this term that really came from Phil Gramm. He's the one who popularized the attacks on so-called pork barrel legislation. And what do they mean by pork barrel? Well, a politician who gets jobs for people in his district. What's wrong with that? Well, the problem is they stopped getting productive jobs, and they got government jobs. Or jobs to be watchdogs over what the government's doing with your money. Like a lot of the so-called stimulus bill was to hire people to see where the stimulus money was going. That was called a jobs program by Obama. Now, an FDR jobs program said, look, we need to control rivers. We need to have water where we need water and have dams where we don't need water. We need to use that water for power. We need to invest in other sources of energy, including nuclear. We need to build dams. We need to build roads. We need to upgrade our cities. We need to build new schools. And so we had the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. What did that do? That took a lot of people who were unemployed and unemployable and gave them jobs to produce something that gave them skills. The Public Works Administration, the Works Progress Administration, the TVA, the Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee Dam. These weren't wasted government projects that were just spending money, or to use the proper term for that idea, Keynesian. See, people try to say Roosevelt was a Keynesian. John Maynard Keynes was a British financial economist who was what today they call a leftist, because what he said is government should just spend money, and then people will have money and buy things, and that will create a recovery. Now, that's as stupid as Phil Gramm, who says government shouldn't spend anything. You know, Phil Gramm is so dumb. You know, he makes bold evils, and I mean the bugs look intelligent. Graham's whole thing was that government should be like a family and not spend more than it takes in. Well, have you ever heard of a mortgage? Have you ever heard of college loans? Have you ever heard of a car loan? How many people actually spend nothing but the money they make to stay alive? Sometimes you have to go into debt. For example, in housing. A good, safe environment for a family makes someone more productive. Working for something like that gives you a sense that you're doing something good. Well, Phil Gramm, by the way, Phil Gramm is someone who got his college tuition paid for by the government. When he got done with college, he went to work at a government university with research grants from the government. So I don't know where this guy gets his moral, how he can even look at himself in the mirror. After he left government, after getting rid of Glass-Steagall, you know who he went to work for? The Union Bank of Switzerland, which is one of the biggest tax evaders and one of the biggest supporters of derivatives. And it was UBS which came up with the idea of bail-ins. That's Phil Gramm. Now, but he got popular because he said, we don't want money to go to big government. And all the stupid Americans just started saying, I could have more money if it wasn't for government spending. And they didn't distinguish between necessary areas of spending and stupid policies. They just said it's government. And so this is the difference between FDR, who said, we're going to produce more. Now, he also ended farm foreclosures and home foreclosures by signing an executive order. Obama could have done that. We could have reorganized mortgages so people could stay in their homes, getting them jobs so they could pay the mortgages, rewrite them down as the prices of housing dropped again. Instead, we got people in second mortgages and new homes at a very high rate, then foreclosed them, and now banks are holding on to these homes, probably in many cases illegally, because the banks don't really own them. And now that when the prices dropped, they drove everyone out, then banks are and loan money to people, big speculators, to buy the homes at low rates, and the housing prices are starting to go up again. Now, who's buying those homes? The mythology is that people who are getting jobs because of Obama's recovery are now going out and buying homes. You know, at $10 an hour, you can't buy a $300,000 house. I don't care who you are. You could during the Bush housing bubble, but not today. Most of the jobs that have been created, including in California, have been low-wage, temporary, and part-time. And people lost manufacturing jobs that paid a decent wage. Now, here's what FDR did, just to give you a sense of how this thing worked. He had to fight like hell against entrenched interests. And after his first term, a lot of the New Deal policies were scaled back. That's why we went back into a recession in 37 and 38. It's not that the policies didn't work, it's that the Congress scaled it back because of the vote that took place in 36, where he lost some of his allies in the Congress. But as it became clear we were headed to war, the FDR policies, which then included, well, it meant that the factories had been reopened. he started investing in those manufacturing processes. And here's what we did. Between 1939 and 1944, wages doubled. Corporate profits went up significantly, but they were given tax breaks if they reinvested in creating more jobs. Industrial production doubled during that period. The manufacturing workforce grew between 38 and 44 from 10.28 million people to 16.33. So it's over 6 million additional manufacturing jobs between 1938 and 1944. And in that period, unemployment fell from about 9.5 million to 670,000. That's a recovery. Now, after the war, actually, one other point. In 1938, the United States produced 34,000 machine tools in a year. By 1942, that was up to 307,000. So it nearly increased by tenfold. But the power of each machine tool was greater because of scientific discovery and because with new credit, you were able to constantly write off your old plant equipment and get new equipment. And your workforce, because they were now remoralized and because they knew they were organizing the economy for a war, they learned quickly. They developed new skills. They could innovate. And so it's not just a tenfold increase in the numbers, but an increase in the power per worker. That's productivity. That's what FDR did. What did Obama do? He bailed out Wall Street. Obamacare bailed out the insurance companies. He put money into green policy, which is throwing it down a rat hole. Solar. Look at all these solar companies that are failing. The battery factories. Obama did a job tour where a battery company hired 6 workers and got $500 million from the U.S. government. A year later, it was in bankruptcy. This was the Obama plan. And this is still not being touched by the media. So our job is to take this question of Glass-Steagall as the opening policy, because what FDR did, we can do much better today. The first thing we have to do with Glass-Steagall is give banks, the big banks, a year to get their ducks in a row. They have to decide whether they're going to be a commercial bank or an investment bank. If they're going to be an investment bank, no more money from the government, no more bailouts. And they're going to have to then sit there and decide whether to sell off those assets now, in which case no one's going to buy them. The prices will just skydive. Or wait a couple of years and see if maybe some of them will appreciate to 10 cents on the dollar. But they're going to eat the losses, the investment banks, not the people. Now with commercial banks, what we're going to find is that their deposits have been looted. There's not that much there. We're going to have to create new credit. And that brings up the whole question that Lyndon LaRouche has been discussing extensively now, which is a credit policy. A Bank of the United States, where the Congress determines through discussion with the executive how much credit is necessary, and then a national bank issues that credit. Not money, but credit. So that local banks have the capacity to make loans again to finance local economy. The idea of a national bank is not some group of bureaucrats in Washington deciding who gets money. It still goes through local bankers who know the community. They know the capabilities. But right now they don't have money. They don't have credit to make available. But if you go with a national credit policy, you immediately open the spigot for production on the local level. And to really make sure that it takes off, you have a few big national projects, like the WAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance, which we estimate could produce between 6 and 10 million jobs. Bringing water from Alaska, building new cities, new roads, high-speed rail, power systems, water management. You know, we were just talking before about how in the city of Phoenix, half of the water that's consumed there is for golf courses. Las Vegas, 2/3 is golf courses and casinos. And that's our economy. And pretty soon they're going to run out of golf courses because the elderly are going to be killed off by Obamacare. So they're not going to be able to retire to Phoenix and go play golf. So we could create these jobs. Now, let me come back to what I started with, the question of the culture. And I'm leaving a lot of things open because I want to have a discussion session here where we get at this question of how can you have the sense of confidence and authority so you can go talk to legislators and tell them what to do. See, here's the problem. Everybody complains about their congressman or the Congress in general. A lot of people say, my congressman's okay, but the Congress in general is no good. But how many people have the guts to call a congressman and talk to, go through 6 or 8 aides and finally say, look, you're not the person I want to talk to. I want to know why the congressman hasn't signed on for Glass-Steagall. And I'll tell you something I'm being truthful here. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. The American people are a bunch of damn cowards. We've become cowards. We complain all the time, but we're afraid of authority. You give someone a 6-piece suit and a briefcase and people think they're an authority. Look at the idiots they have as commentators on television. I'm talking about Fox News, CNN, the CNBC, Maria Bartiromo, the money hunter, basically on a button or buttons, and breathlessly talked about .com stocks, and all these yuppies on their exercycles put in call orders to buy stocks. That's how you produce a bubble. Look at the cheerleaders on CNBC right now. Well, this is a stock. I don't know why the company seems to be collapsing. They have no money, no jobs, no plan. But it looks like a good buy because the stock's going up. It's a rigged game. How many, here, I don't know if anyone here considers himself a gold bug. How many of you a year ago thought, I've got it made, I'm buying gold. Look at gold, it's going way up. It's never going to stop. A lot of people did. And there were dozens of websites that cheerlead. Now they're saying, forget gold, buy silver. And what is it we think? Somehow I can make money. The gold markets are rigged at a company called N.M. Rothschild in London. That's where the gold price is set. Has nothing to do with supply and demand. Has nothing to do with any of the things they talk about on these blab shows. It has to do with the policies that are being pursued at the top levels. And here's why this question of cowardice is so important. What are they saying at the top levels? Do you really think there are people in the City of London saying, well, let's fix this a little bit, fix that a little bit, then we can get a real recovery? No, they're basically saying, how do we reduce the world's population? That's the policy of the British Empire. That's always the policy of an empire. Take the smartest people who can be corrupted and bring them in to work with them. Kill off the ones who can't be corrupted and turn the rest of the population into a bunch of sheep and slaves. That's how empires work. Now, our republic was set up by people who were consciously committed to destroy that model. Benjamin Franklin was a genius. Hamilton was a financial genius. And I say that in the higher sense of finance, because he knew the purpose of finance is to build and develop an economy, not to get rich by trading things. Trading is the Adam Smith policy. There's no difference between investing in a steel mill and a whorehouse for Adam Smith, except the whorehouse will give you a quicker return. What does it do for the economy in the future? Who cares? Who cares? These women are expendable. The men who go there are expendable. The diseases that spread are good because they'll reduce the people that we don't want. Why invest in a steel mill where you're going to get 5% a year over 15, 20 years, if that, when you can get a 50% rate of return by bringing 12-year-olds up from Colombia and selling them to crazed men who come out of sports bars frustrated because their team lost. You turn people into slaves around sex and greed, sensual pleasure. That's what's happened to our country. That's why we're about to go the way of an empire. We're not an empire, but we're the tail of the British Empire. And Obama is a puppet of the Queen of England who is committed, I'm talking about the Queen now, not Obama, committed to reducing the world's population to 1 billion people. It's in their writings. It's all over the place. Prince Philip, who should have taken his own advice and left the world a long time ago. Prince Philip said, he told the Swiss insurance gathering, if reincarnation is real, he'd like to come back as a deadly virus to reduce the world's population. How many Americans admire the British royal family? Now, Prince Charles is sort of an aging goof. I mean, he's a killer. But he spends time talking to plants, and he doesn't really distinguish between human beings and horses. So he's sort of over the hill. Now there's a love affair with Willie and Harry. You look at the media; they're building these guys up as sex symbols, great heroes. Prince Harry, who for fun dresses as a Nazi Gestapo. These guys are degenerates, but they have power because of the empire, the financial empire, which is interlocked with media, with resources, with food, oil, and so on. And they've run the world into the ground. And these are the people who are saying we have to fund Saudi-backed terrorists in Syria, we have to overthrow the government of Iran, we have to blow up that whole region. And what's the ultimate target? Is it really the Iranian mullahs? No, it's Russia. Russia and China. Now, with that said, let me get back to the first point I made. We've got to change the culture, change the way people think. Now, it's not as simple as telling people to start listening to Mozart. Although that's a good starting point. If people listen to Mozart, they sometimes get rid of some of their anger and their impotent rage. But it's actually to look at the minds of great thinkers, scientists, composers, dramatists, because the truly great thinkers start from this question of how do you uplift a population? How do you change a population so that they move above their senses? And the best example of this is Beethoven. The deaf Beethoven writing the Ninth Symphony. He never heard a note of that music. He never experienced with his senses that music. Yet look at the masterpiece that he produced. How did he do it? He did try different things with sense perception. He cut the legs off his piano and stuck it on the ground and tried to see if he could feel the vibrations. Ultimately, it was his mind. How did Kepler come up with the organization of the solar system? Now, you don't exactly see Saturn doing elliptical arcs. How did he do it? He took his mind off the Earth. He put his mind in space, which is what Lynn is saying we have to do now with Mars. We don't need people there right now. You just kill them to send them there. But we can send instruments that will give us things that we can't get with our senses. Now, why do we do these kinds of things? Why did Beethoven write music? There's a beautiful, I should have brought it with me, a beautiful statement he wrote from the town of Heiligenstadt, which is a suburb of Vienna, when he was going deaf. And he starts it, it's a letter to his two brothers, and he starts it by saying, the one sense that I have that should be better than anyone else, I'm losing. People expect me to hear well, and I can't hear. I can't hear a pipe playing in the distance, a shepherd playing a pipe. And he starts to say, I can't take this. And he says he's suicidal. But then in the middle of this letter, he says, but I have a gift, something that I can give people. It's been given to me by God, a capability, a power. And that's what I'm going to do with my life. And there's a famous story of when he was writing his late quartets. He had a group of people playing them, and he's sitting there. He can't hear, of course. He's sitting there watching and looking around. And all of a sudden, he looks up, and they're not playing. And he says, "What's wrong?" And they say, "We don't understand this." And he said, "Well, keep playing. It's not for you, it's for the future. Now, that's the idea of a republic, where you develop in each person a sense of responsibility for the future, where you're willing to make a sacrifice. And I really mean this. In some cases, many of you come from immigrant families. Actually, all of you do. And somewhere along the way, your ancestors who came here made sacrifices. Very few people emigrated to America with rich bank accounts. But they worked and did things for their children and grandchildren. And it's the boomer generation where we went off the rails, where people started saying, I want to have everything for myself. I want to have all the pleasures. It's all about me. And we look at the generation that comes up after the boomers, and we see they're indifferent about things. You look at the younger generation. That's what I was saying earlier. They don't talk to each other. You see people sitting across the room texting to each other. Illiterately. You go to Facebook or you go to these things and people make up identities. Why? Because their lives are boring and hopeless. Now, as long as you have a mind, your life isn't boring. And as long as you have a heart and a soul, it's not hopeless. And we took an almost hopeless situation in these last 5 years, where our organization went against popular opinion. We took out signs that had a Hitler mustache on Obama. And we went into the black neighborhoods where Obama was 100% popularity. And some of our people got hit over the head. But we kept going back. And you know, in those neighborhoods now, even though people still voted for Obama in large numbers in the African American community, the total number who voted dropped. And now people are saying, who the hell is this guy? Some of them remember he's half white. It's the white side here. I'm joking about that, but it is true. I do a lot of radio shows, and I know in the African American community, there's a rage developing. Because as the front end of poverty, who's got the highest rates of unemployment in this country? African Americans. Highest rate of teen pregnancies, single mother families. No future. And how do suicide rates are higher. But there's another form of suicide. Drugs, alcoholism, gangs. People live by the underground economy. That's the only reason there hasn't been a bigger explosion. Buying and selling drugs to each other. And some of that drug money, by the way, went to fund the 2008 Obama presidential campaign from George Soros. So we told the truth about Obama. Lyndon LaRouche never wavered. He kept talking about the innate creative potential of every human being, even as we saw people on the pathway to hell in their personal lives and identity. And our job, the way you have authority to talk to a representative, is that you're standing against that. You're standing against that sense perception that tells you you can't win. You're standing against the idea that human beings are just creatures of feeling and experience, sensual experience. You're standing for the future generations that won't have a chance if these policies continue. And that gives us our authority. And that authority is the crucial ingredient now that's needed to get Glass-Steagall through. And by the way, if you get Glass-Steagall through, Obama will probably have his head blow up on television. You've seen him recently. He's totally enraged. You know, they ask him, what about the IRS scandal? And he says, well, if the allegations are true. What allegations? The IRS confessed that they did it. There he was one day with Cameron, the next day with Erdogan of Turkey, and all the questions are about IRS and AP. And he said, look, I'm telling you, I won't stand for this. Then they fire a couple people and they say it's over. So Glass-Steagall will drive them over the edge. And Glass-Steagall will immediately reverse this collapse. The credit policy will put millions of people to work, and we're going to rebuild this country. Now, I haven't said much about Europe because Europe's a total mess right now. The good thing about Europe is that they still watch what happens in the United States. And if we go with Glass-Steagall, the line is, well, if we go with Glass-Steagall, then the European banks will take advantage of us. The European banks don't have two nickels to rub together. They're getting money from the U.S. Federal Reserve. If we don't bail them out, they're finished. The Russians and the Chinese will rush to join us. And the Russians have a lot of resources, including in Siberia that are undiscovered. We can collaborate with them in the Arctic. Russia, despite what most people think, has been an ally of the United States for much of our history. And are the Chinese a threat? The Chinese' biggest fear is a collapse of the Western economy, which will create a crisis for the 300 to 400 million people, or maybe more, who live below the poverty level in China. China's had enormous growth, and they've pulled a lot of people out of poverty. But if we have a slowdown and it hits them, they're going to have social chaos. So what's the solution to these things? Get Obama out and get Glass-Steagall. And get a healthy dialogue going among people who give up this idea that money and sensual gratification is what life is about. And that's where classical culture comes in. And that's why for us, politics and culture is one and the same. If you have a collapse of a culture, you're going to see it in your political life. So let me stop at that and open it up for questions.
So I agree that Glass-Steagall and the people of Obama are absolutely first priorities. How do we deal with divide and conquer? You know that those who have an interest, a vested interest in the way things are going to try to split us all up, and you've got camps here and there, left and right, center, etc., that don't quite see all the commonalities and see the benefits. And I look at the bill now. It sits in Congress. I think there's 62 co-sponsors, maybe 2 Republicans, primarily Democrats. That's going to be used as a wedge to try to split everybody. So how do we work to support something that a lot of people can get behind and get past the media and their biases?
Well, let me start with 2 points here. First, we're now on the state level getting Republicans to support Glass-Steagall. And the way we have to approach it with Republicans is to say, are you guys for the bailout? Are you for the big banks? Are you for Wall Street? Because if you don't support Glass-Steagall, you're for Wall Street. Now, one of the things that's being done on this divide and conquer thing is they're coming up with a phony bill, the too big to fail bill, where they're saying, let's make the banks smaller rather than change their function. And this is just a classic example. It's the Brown-Vitter bill. In Europe, they have something called ring fencing, or the Vickers Commission, or Lykanen Commission. And in Germany, they just passed something supposedly a Glass-Steagall, but it's not a Glass-Steagall. The real Glass-Steagall is a very simple, short thing. Now, the point we have to make to Republicans, though, is that the system is collapsing. It's not recovering. One of the lies out there to Democrats is don't mess with Obama's recovery. Now, most people in the population don't believe that because they know it's going to recover. Republicans are afraid of that. They're afraid there's going to be a big recovery, a big boom, and they're going to be left out in the cold. We've just got to develop that point in them. But here's the deeper issue. It's exactly what you said at the beginning. Divide and conquer is the way the empire works. What is the national interest? Is the national interest to be divided into a small number of super rich and a collapsed middle class and poor people? Is that the national interest? How do you change that? You've got to have credit for production. There's no other way it'll work. And we've got to educate people on the nature of value and productivity. That it's not a money question, it's a physical question. Now this is the tougher issue here. Because it's not just a question of saying banks are bad, Glass-Steagall will get them, and that's how we're going to do it. It's getting people to rethink what it means to be a human being. and that a productive life is one where you add to the productive value of every human being, as opposed to enable some people to make money off other people. Now, there's one other point I'll just add here. That if you think about that, you'll realize this is an easy thing to talk to people about. Because without Glass-Steagall, you're going to have one form of bailout or another. Or so-called creative destruction, where everything collapses and then supposedly entrepreneurs rebuild it. And that's a model that never existed in history, except in the fantasy of Phil Graham. And here's the other thing. The people who are running the divide and conquer, they're more bankrupt than you are. I don't care how much debt you're sitting here with. I don't care how many times you filed for bankruptcy. J.P. Morgan Chase is more bankrupt than you are. But as long as they have the aura of power, namely the government willing to support them, they'll survive and they'll kill you. So Glass-Steagall rips the cover off and exposes these banks for what they are, repositories of junk. They're getting rich now buying and selling junk bonds to fund takeovers. What are they taking over? They're taking over a company that they're going to sell off and make a profit by selling it off. What do they sell? Crap. You know, there's a book called Too Big to Fail, which is a pretty bad book overall. I reviewed it for the EIR. But it describes a scene where they're all sitting around with Bernanke talking about trying to get Barclays to buy Lehman Brothers. And finally, someone says, well, we just did some due diligence on Lehman Brothers. You really expect us to buy this crap? And then someone else said, well, that's what we've been doing. They know they're buying and selling crap. They know there's nothing there. But as long as we think these are the titans, these are the people who know how to run an economy, then we lose. Now, what's the problem again with Republicans and Democrats? They live with the money from these guys. And they're more afraid of losing that money than they are that you're going to go in with a pitchfork into their office. I don't mean you have to bring a pitchfork. Metaphorical pitchfork. But you know, back in the old days, tar and feather worked pretty well. Showing up at a town meeting saying, look, we're not here to discuss this anymore. We got tar and feather here. Are you going to support Glass-Steagall or not? Now, you don't actually have to tar and feather. Most of these guys don't look very good with tar and feather on their Hermes suits. But we've got to scare them more that they're going to lose their constituents than they are of losing Wall Street money. And that's where courage comes in.
But there's also a mechanical issue that you mentioned earlier, which are these derivatives. So Bank of America with their $75 trillion that they brought over from Merrill Lynch, you've got JP Morgan, all of these guys have trillions of dollars of derivatives that they brought over to the banking side of the house, so apart from the investment side. And they're trying to make, or they plan to make, if they haven't already, made FDIC responsible for any losses they had there. So I would think that as a last ditch effort, they may try and use a scare tactic to suggest that, that's going to go away.
Well, no, that's what Glass-Steagall would do. Glass-Steagall would say, we're going to sit down with you and differentiate between legitimate debt that you have, as well as, and bank debt is what? It's deposits. So that has to be protected, and that will be protected by FDIC and whatever else. But those things that are derivatives, even though the banks have bought them using deposits and are holding a lot of them, those are going to be put in the other column, which will not be bailed out. And we'll give them time to try and find buyers for them. There won't be many. And maybe, over time they'll sell some of these things off for 5, 10, 15% of the dollar. And we probably should have a law in Glass-Steagall which says that whatever does come out goes to the pension funds first, not to the shareholders. Whereas now it goes to the shareholders and senior stockholders first. But mechanically, there's no problem. We did it. Glass-Steagall did it. It works. It was a 33-page bill. It worked. And that's the other point we have to make to congressmen. Now, what congressmen will say, there are two talking points they have, which come from the banks. One, that Glass-Steagall wouldn't have stopped 2008. Well, by 2008, it was too late. You had 9 years of reckless speculation. If you had kept Glass-Steagall in place, commercial banks would not have been able to loan money to hedge funds and others who were writing these instruments and then buying them. So yes, Glass-Steagall would have prevented 2008. And then secondly, they say, well, but actually someone told me the other day, you're just reinventing the wheel. We're now on a new technology. Derivatives represent a new form of wealth. And I said, they don't represent wealth, they represent con jobs. And we have a legitimate right as a government to protect people from swindlers. And derivative transactions are swindles. And we're going to put a law against it. Not to regulate. We should have a law against derivatives. The reason derivatives came into being is because of the floating exchange rates. And so they said, how do we do business with a country that has a different currency when the exchange rates may go up or down so much? We need a hedge. That's what most risk management started with. So you go back to fixed exchange rates, that throws out all currency speculation. And then you pass a law against speculating on food. Why do we allow people to speculate on food? We need food. You can make money by suppressing food production. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So you see, these things we can deal with legislatively. The problem is getting people over this idea that they'll always find a way. The bankers are too powerful. They always win. The Illuminati, the conspirators, the Bilderbergers, they always win and we always lose. Bullshit. They're a bunch of stupid fools who are trying to impose a system that's broken down on us. And if we sit there and whine about it, it's our own fault when the guillotine comes down on our neck. And instead, we just have to say, no more. That's it. We've given them 5 years to repair this thing, and they've made it worse. We're in worse shape today than we were in September 2000. And that's what you have to communicate. And if you can do it, you'll be surprised. These guys will listen. I mean, aren't we getting that response now from the legislature? People who 2 years ago wouldn't give us 5 seconds are now discussing these things. Because they know that everything that's been done is not a solution. So who else? Yeah.
In the past month or so, I've been kind of stonewalled by a couple of senators in California saying that the Volcker rule is the solution. Could you explain what that is and how to overcome that type of smokescreen?
Yeah, the Volcker rule was essentially drafted to avoid Glass-Steagall. And the whole point of the Volcker rule is to say that we have to deal with derivatives, but they're sophisticated, so we have to, over time, have legislative regulations evolve. So most of the so-called Volcker rule is not in place. In fact, it doesn't even exist. It's a framework for a law that hasn't been written yet. And that's a lot of Dodd-Frank. That's why they say Dodd-Frank is 1,100 pages going on 32,000. Because it hasn't been written yet. Now, what they're arguing is that for everything we can do to regulate, the derivatives dealers will figure out a way around it. Now, there's a simple thing to do then. Just say, well, we're not going to allow derivative dealers to run the economy. That's what Glass-Steagall does. Whereas the Volcker rule is basically saying, we've got a disease out there, but we're going to try and limit the effect of the disease, even though we know that everything we do will cause it to spread more. That's incompetence. So we have to just say to people, the Volcker rule was written to protect Wall Street and not the people. And Glass-Steagall protects the people, not the banks. And fight it out with them. We've produced things that answer these questions and go through it. Just say, look, Senator, take 10 minutes to read this, because you're just flat wrong. The Volcker rule was put in to stop calls for Glass-Steagall. And there was a call for Glass-Steagall from John McCain and Maria Cantwell, liberal Democrat from Washington and the nutcase from Arizona. This is one thing McCain was right about. And who came in and stopped it, kept it out of Dodd-Frank? Geithner and Obama. And this is something we should tell Republicans. The Volcker rule was pushed by Wall Street Democrats, and only stupid Republicans will talk that way. We've got to say that to some of these guys, because they need to be shaken up. And it's not that we hate Republicans or Democrats. We hate people who put party over nation, or party over principle. We don't hate them, we want to defeat them. Get them out of there. If they want to have a party, they should have a party. Not ours.
You want to explain how the Glass-Steagall still was?
Yeah, what happened is that I could give you this is something I've been studying as it unfolded. I've written dozens of articles in the BNR. But the short story is, the line came out from bankers that they could make a lot more money if they freed money from the real economy. They knew that. And so how do you do that? Well, you have to get rid of the rule which says banks exist to fund the real economy. Because that's what Glass-Steagall is. It says commercial banks are there to fund the real economy. So you have to break down the walls. So what happened is Donald Regan, remember him, the former Treasury Secretary, who I believe was with Merrill Lynch before he went into the Reagan administration. He launched this campaign for what he called one-stop banking. He said Americans have to go to an insurance company for insurance, and a savings and loan for mortgages, and a commercial bank for this, and a credit card company for that. What Americans really want is one-stop banking. Nobody said we want one-stop banking. It's a complete fraud. And what they did is they started using that to say we've got to break down these distinctions. So under Carter, we had a banking deregulation bill of 1980. Under Reagan, we had the 1982 deregulation bill. Then Greenspan in '84, when he was working with J.P. Morgan, launched a campaign with a paper to get rid of Glass-Steagall. And then when Greenspan came in as Federal Reserve Chairman, this was the center of his activity. He was deregulating everything that he could touch. And then Phil Graham's wife, Wendy Graham, was put in charge of the Commodities Future Trade Corporation in 1989, under Bush Sr., to deregulate the commodities markets, to create commodity derivatives. And then there were a couple of other things in the early 90s, and then finally Graham Leach Bliley in 1999 said all the rest of Glass-Steagall is done. And a year later, Graham introduced something called the Commodities Futures Modernization Act, which got rid of all regulation of derivatives. He did that as his wife was then serving on the board of Enron. And as Enron went under, one of the things Enron did, this is important to just add this, Enron was broke. What they did is they took the debt that was unrecoverable, put it into something called a special investment vehicle, an SIV, a SIV, and got Wall Street to buy bonds in that special investment vehicle, so they had a little cash. So they took the debt off their books. And in fact, it was still Enron debt. And they crashed. After they crashed, the Federal Reserve made it legal for corporations to do that. So the Enron model became the model for investment. This is what they're doing now with the commercial banks. J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America pioneered this. Bank of America did it because of the Merrill Lynch and the Countrywide problem. They've separated out a certain portion of their debt, but they're trying to still buy and sell it, so they're putting some money in it. But they've taken it off their books, so they say, see, we're in better shape, asset to debt ratio. But they're not, because they're still carrying this other debt in another vehicle.
So what you're saying is, Glass-Steagall was repealed during the Clinton administration, but there's a build-up to that.
There was a long build-up to it. And don't forget, Clinton had two people who were big supporters of this. One was Robert Rubin of Citibank, and Citibank's Sanford Weill was one of the people with Greenspan who conspired to get rid of Glass-Steagall. Now Sandy Weill is saying we need to get Glass-Steagall back. The other person is one of the most insane so-called economists on the planet, Larry Summers. Larry Summers is the guy who gambled away the Harvard endowment when he was president buying derivatives. Larry Summers is the guy who said women are not good scientists because they're women. Larry Summers was the Treasury Secretary after Rubin left the Clinton administration. And Clinton signed it during the period where his main preoccupation was Monica Lewinsky and the scandal. So let's just say his mind wasn't fully on the country at that time. Now, I don't think he should have signed it, he should have vetoed it, but I think that's a problem in Clinton. Clinton decided to go along with it. The Democrats, who used to support Glass-Steagall, gradually moved away from it because of Wall Street money. That's what the Democratic Leadership Council is.
You began your presentation here with the issue of culture. And my question goes, as we're working with people of the culture, we can identify the problem. And I know in my case, I usually spend too much time identifying the problem and not taking the imagination or the hope into the potential future with the victory on this specific issue. How do you blend that in your radio host, radio programs or in your other organizing to balance that where we don't overload the problem and crush the
Well, I think, look, there are two things. You do have to make clear to people that the problem is the way they think. And that's a hard one because most people think they're normal and everybody else is crazy. Even though they share the same view with everybody else. You have to get across to people that the way they think, the things they like, are what gets them in trouble. You know, the small sins, so to speak, pave the way to hell. You know, the concessions people make day to day. Well, I'll do something to improve myself later, but tonight I'm going to get drunk and listen to country music. You know, things that are not so egregious. But you have to get people to realize that the fact that they know the country's going in the wrong direction, but they won't do anything about it, that's a characteristic of a degenerate culture. When the majority knows, look, 62% of the latest polls say the country's going in the wrong direction. What the hell are they doing about it? You know, if you're in a car and the driver's drunk and about to drive off the cliff, are you going to sit there and say, well, looks like we're going in the wrong direction? Or are you going to grab the steering wheel and try and steer it onto the road? So the first thing is you have to identify for people, it's the way they think and the way they're habituated to think that's the cause of the problem. Now, from that standpoint, I often then just try and get people to laugh at the culture. You know, what kind of culture has a show like Seinfeld be the most popular show during the 90s, where everybody in it is a person you would hate? They're all a bunch of damn liars who try and get over on everybody. What's the character of most of our culture? It's sex and violence. Or so-called reality shows, where people go out of their way to make bigger fools out of themselves to make a little bit of money. So you get people to look at what the culture is that they tolerate. That their children go to school, and instead of studying the great ideas of mankind and trying to master those ideas, they try to learn how to pass a multiple choice test that George W. Bush would pass. That's not an education. That's a kind of brainwashing. A pattern, to get a response pattern from children, instead of inspiring them with great ideas. So I think, you know, I incorporate that into the question of what kind of sane country has a guy in the White House who says he's for the people and everything he does is for the big banks. You know, I have fun with conservatives on this because, oh, Obama's a socialist. And I say, who ever heard of a socialist that transfers wealth from the poorest people to the richest? That's not socialism. Nothing to do with socialism. That's called fascism. And people, ooh. You got to challenge them on that kind of level. But I do think you've got to come back to this question, and you've got to be willing to duck quickly. When you start saying to people that the music you listen to is what's making you a slave. The movies you go to, the things you like to do with your friends, that's what's making you a slave. Now you say you like it. You really like watching television shows where everybody's a disgusting person making fun of each other? That's your idea of entertainment? I think that's the way you have to do it. You have to hold a mirror up. You do it with compassion and sharp humor, irony. Because a healthy nation doesn't tolerate an Obama versus John Boehner as the political debate in the country. And I think people know that. They just don't think there's a way to get it. They don't think there's a way to get a smart. You know, people will sometimes say, well, how come you're not in the Congress, or how come you're not president? And you say, well, what have you done to get me then? You want to sign up? Here's some money. Yeah.
You mentioned Boehner. Interestingly, just a couple of days ago, I was chatting with this fellow, very articulate gentleman, Chicano descent, clearly, and he said, he pointed to a picture, and Boehner was in it. I said, I know who that is. Made a joke about his name. Okay, leave that out. He said that he offered him, he urged him, he says, get into politics. He says, I don't want to get into politics. I like what I'm doing. He said, get into politics. I'll come up with $1 million and, you know, we'll get this thing rolling and you'll be a big shot. He says, no, I don't want any part of it. What he's trying to do, I think, what we're trying to do, I think, is set himself up with one more guy who's going to listen to him and do what he wants and so forth, and he'll be comfortable. It's an insight into what's really going on with that guy. He's probably got a dozen or 24 of those stooges out there. Oh, I'm representing you.
Well, he does, but I'll tell you the other thing. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are splitting. They're cracking up. Look, the so-called Tea Party people, the ones who are really honest and good, don't like bailouts and don't like Obamacare, but they don't know how to fight it. Then you've got people like McCain, who really is running a defense for Obama. McCain is for all intents and purposes, supporting Obama. Now, in the Democratic Party, you've got the Democrats who are against the drone policy. You've got the Democrats who fought Bush over the Patriot Act, only to see Obama strengthen the spying on American citizens. You've got the Democrats who still revere FDR and Social Security, watching Obama now do more to destroy Social Security than George W. Bush did. So the Democratic Party, you've got the minorities, I think the Black Caucus is going nuts against Obama. And Obama won't even meet with them. It's almost like there's a sign, no Negroes allowed in the White House. He won't invite them. He wouldn't invite them to lunch. So they're angry. So look, there's a split out there. This is why what LaRouche said about cautious optimism. We can see a way out of this, but it's going to be a real fight. And the fight is not against Obama, because he's, you know, some of the people who support him are now beginning to say he's a failure. He's used up his political capital. Now, I don't know what they're going to do. Maybe they'll shoot him and use his bloody shirt to push through his policies. But you know, the point is that the fight is not against Obama, it's against the slavish mentality of our fellow Americans. Yeah.
Well, you got my mind so scrambled up, it feels like it's been in the blender right now. Make a couple of statements. Point number one, and chime in if when necessary. I think everybody in this room needs to get in touch with their senators in the state of California and mildly, aggressively / emphatically suggest that they support Glass-Steagall.
Well, Mike will give us a quick report on that in a couple of minutes. because
Okay.
He's been in Sacramento. We actually have a situation where we can move some people.
Okay, so another thing is that I'm a libertarian kind of guy, right? And my attitude is government leave me alone, let me do my own thing, I'll take care of myself, I got to go. Okay? Now, I used to think of Democrats, I think because of Obama, they've gotten a bad name from being associated with this guy. Now, a lot of people in here are Democrats. I'm beginning to change my attitude about you guys. Okay, I'm serious. I used to say Democrat, excuse me, please don't use foul language. And I'm beginning to change that attitude. I want to thank everybody here for that, and you, and everyone in the room. I'm beginning to think that Democrats may be human after all.
Well, let me take you asked me to chime in.
Yeah.
Let me take it a step higher. It's not Democrats or Republicans. No one is born a Democrat or a Republican.
I think they're all
You
right.
choose the pathology, usually from your parents. But here's the point. It's political parties that cause the problem. And political parties have a certain, with money, with flows of money, with the necessity of what you have to do these days to get elected.
Yeah.
People choose parties like a sports team. And then you cheer for your sports team.
No matter what they do.
Yeah. And you say, well, you think our guys are bad, you should see the other guys.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. Now, our intervention has to be on the question of principle. This nation was founded on a set of principles that are embedded in our Constitution. Most Americans, even Americans who have never studied the Constitution, feel those principles. Justice, equal opportunity. You know, what some people mistakenly call libertarianism is really from our Constitution, which is a pro-government document. I don't think people understand that. They say, I'm for a strict interpretation of the Constitution, which is anti-government. Bullshit! George Washington set up a government. We gave the government limited powers, but absolute authority on those limited powers, and the most important was protection of individual liberties against private privilege. Now, that in a sense is what some people see as libertarianism, but that's also what a government protects. What I said at the beginning is we have an irony, which is that we're all innately endowed with human rights, but we need institutions that protect human rights from those who would usurp them. And that's what a nation state is. And our country was lucky that we actually established a Republican Constitution that puts in its principles the defense of those human rights. And we have to make sure that that standard is adhered to. And people who just knee-jerk attack government, if you have a problem with something the government's doing, then let's find out who's doing it and who's responsible and get them the hell out. But if you get rid of government, you're going to end up with chaos.
Yeah, I really didn't mean that.
Well, I know you didn't. You told me to pipe in. I'm just clarifying. Because you're not as scrambled as you think you are.
Okay, I'll turn off the blender. We have a situation right now where we find that a large proportion of the people in this country voted for Obama, basically, and they got bought off by stuff. And he promised that he'd give them stuff, and so they voted for him. But that's the way I see it.
Well, I don't think it's a large portion, but I think a certain percentage of people did. And here's the thing. Obama said the government's going to be on your side. And the Republicans said we're not, the government shouldn't be involved. Now, Obama lied and Romney was stupid.
Yeah.
The purpose of the president is to make sure the government defends the interests of the people.
I agree.
So Romney basically shot himself in the head and let Obama's lies carry the day. So, you know, I'm really trying to distinguish between this question.
I think I understand what you're trying to
Okay.
say. I do agree with you. I really do. Now, what are we going to do about the situation that, regardless of why it's there, it exists, that these people in Wall Street have a big bin full of money that they're shoveling on people in
They're spending hundreds of millions
Yeah.
to keep Glass-Steagall out. Here's what
Right.
we have, but
What
here's
are
what we have
we
to
gonna
do.
do about that?
This is where I'm going to turn it over to Mike in just a second. But I'll just finish with this.
We got one question up here in the front.
Okay, I'll take
We're trying to
this
get
question.
in.
In a minute. But the point is, the power is with the people if the people use it. And I don't know if you know, if we took the people in this room right now and started marching into town meetings of congressmen and state reps and state senators and said, there's one thing on the agenda right now, are you going to support Glass-Steagall? And then they said, well, that's not part of our meeting, you. And the next person said, we got people in Texas where we did this to sign on to the Glass-Steagall bill. Because they said, boy, if people are that serious about it, I gotta get behind it. So it really is a question of what we do. Let me take this question, and then Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
I just want to say that I think in our culture, it's actually a mental illness. Like, it's really mentally ill to think what's normal, quote, status quo, and we're the crazy ones. And when dealing particularly with people in that state, it's very difficult. You could, they're drinking Kool-Aid and they think it's water. And trying to tell somebody, even if you have black and white facts and stuff that makes total sense, they're literally brainwashed.
But you're absolutely right. Facts don't win people over because they have their own set of facts. They can go to another website that has a different set of facts. And the other website is the authority. Addressing their mental state is what you have to do.
Right.
And that's the whole point that I was trying to make on this question of culture. Because I think you're absolutely right about we see an increase in so-called mental illness and suicide rates and alcoholism and drug addiction. The most important problem is people have given up their hope. When you have a situation where in urban centers there's 40-50% youth unemployment. In Spain, where in sections of Spain, youth unemployment is 70% right now.
What else are they going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what happens is people, you have to ask yourself, what's the purpose of my life? In countries like Tunisia, where people had education and couldn't get jobs, they rebelled and they were praised the Arab Spring, and then what happens? They've got a new set of leaders who are, it's the same policy because of policies coming from the International Monetary Fund. In Egypt now, 50% of the population of Egypt is at or below the poverty level of a third world country. That's worse than it was under Mubarak. It doesn't mean Mubarak was good. It means that something was done to that country and people there didn't see it. And that's the same thing that's happening here. And how do you open people's eyes? It's not just a set of facts. You have to have the facts.
Right.
You have to know what's right and know what's real. And most of that is from study of history and study of real economics, physical economy, and science, which is what all of our members have done under LaRouche for years.
And it's not taught anymore in school.
That's right. But then the second thing is you have to have the courage to say to someone, I disagree with you and I know you're wrong, but I don't blame you.
Right.
It's because of all the things that have been said to you. And look, the people who run an empire are smart enough to know they can't get everyone to agree. So they have different poisons. You have the so-called free market, you have socialism, you have country western music and rap music. You're not going to see a farmer, with a big pot belly and overalls rapping about killing cops.
You might.
And you actually now you do have people in the ghetto doing country songs. My wife ran off with my best friend, and I miss it. You want to keep the beer real full and put it next to my ex-wife's heart. But you create different cultures, all of which have a degraded image of man, and us against them. We got to protect ourselves, and that does become a form of mental illness. Now, for most people, it's curable. For some people, it's not. For Obama, we got to put him in a padded cell and protect himself from himself because he actually thinks he's the Messiah. And the people around him, Michelle and Valerie Jarrett, probably tell him that every night. So, but I think this is an important point, and that's the point I was trying to make, that what's accepted as normal is not normal in real human society. Human relations are terrible. People are bought and sold. People say, I love you, and then 2 minutes later walk out the door. It means nothing. And this question of a profound human love for each other is what's missing. And it's confused. And it's usually about buying and selling.
And here's the craziness, is that real patriots, a lot of people in this room, we're now the terrorists. We're domestic terrorists.
Of course. And if you believe profoundly that we've got to defend the nation from terrorism, you're put on a list.
Yes.
So, Michael, you want to give a...
Before you turn
Okay.
over, the founding fathers were opposed to political parties. And do you have a concept as to how it would work without political parties?
Well, that's a tough question, because I think that there's got to be some kind of a transition. And to some extent, what they meant by political parties was private interests. If you actually
Is the
look...
corporation as political parties?
Yeah, yeah. And we have the worst of all situations now, because what was set up with this new Supreme Court ruling is a corporation can buy and sell candidates. But the question of how, I think this is where principles, if you have a party that's founded on principles, you may have disagreements on how to achieve those goals, but you have to get, for a nation to survive, you have to have a general consensus around the principles. And I think the founding fathers were fighting for that. And you know what the big problem was? We were still fighting the British Empire after we won the war. And they were trying to use the debt of the United States to break us apart. And the whole idea of states' rights, which became the Confederacy, actually started in Hartford, Connecticut, with an attempt, a conspiracy around the 1812 election to break up the United States using states' rights. And the whole idea of Hamilton is you create a consensus among the states of the direction for the whole nation, and you debate that in the Congress. So, Michael, you want to...
Yeah, sure. I mean, if anybody has any questions for Harley, I really encourage them, if there's any one or two more questions.
Well, I'd like to get the marching orders, and then we can still take...
Sure, okay, that's good. All right, so look, this situation around Glass-Steagall at the U.S. Senate, it should be seen clearly in the context of what's happened with Obama the last 2 weeks. And I say 2 weeks because the last week's been, the media chock full of scandal after scandal hitting Obama. The week prior, though, was when this organization launched a major national week of action and were able to have activity at 40 out of the 50 states of the country, largely at state capitals. Now it's funny, if you go to Google News search and you type in Glass-Steagall, you get 10 listings. 9 of them are our website, and the other one is a news organization covering our National Week of Action. So we have hegemony on this question. It is the LaRouche bill, it is Glass-Steagall. So as Harley said, we are a small organization on a shoestring budget, totally underfunded from what we could do. So take that into account in terms of what you can contribute and what you can do to support us. But here's the question. We have an opportunity now to drive home Glass-Steagall and get Obama out, as Harley made clear, and the broader questions that are involved in that. And I think what Harley said goes into how we're going to now make this process effective. It is, what Harley elaborated, this kind of human identity, which will bring to bear on some of these better people a sense of what they now need to do. Here's the situation in California in the state house, and with some of the Democrats and general members of Congress in California. We've got about a dozen, maybe a few more in California that have signed on. In the Bay Area, these are federal congressmen. I think Anna Eshoo has signed on, if I'm not correct. So Eshoo, Speer, Lofgren, Barbara Lee, George Miller, John Garamendi. That probably leaves Mike Honda, Mike Wilson.
Mike Thompson, I mean?
Mike Thompson, Mike Honda, Nancy Pelosi, Jared Huffman in Marin, Eric Swalwell out in East Bay, McNerney further East Bay. Is that McNerney? So there's the people that could be contacted and harassed. And by all means, if you have any of those, you're members of Congress, or you feel just the obligation to represent the American people, harass any of those that you can. Everyone should participate in contacting Feinstein and Boxer. These are basic things you can do as an individual. You've got a state rep and a state senator. They should be contacted and harassed. We have spent the last 3 months mobilizing in Sacramento, and the shift has been significant. 3 months ago, 4 months ago, very few people were open to the discussion, very few people understood Glass-Steagall, very much they were kind of isolated in this. There's a recovery, you know, why do we need to talk about federal issues of banking? This doesn't make sense. In the last 2 months, we've seen calls for Obama's impeachment from Democrats in the Democratic State Party, a complete shift in a recognition there is no real recovery. There is wide open discussions from a number of offices in Sacramento, and a large support for Glass-Steagall. We don't have a resolution. Everyone says, I'm too busy, we've already got so much to do, my staff is all going to quit if I ask them to do one more thing. Frankly, what it comes down to is all the party leadership does at a national and state level is launder the drug cartel money through Wall Street into the hands of party leadership. And they buy out and intimidate most of the people, and a lot of the staff are party hacks. So a person's there for their 3 years or 6 years of term limits. They've got staff who basically say, if you become an office that's egregious to party leadership, I'm leaving, I'm going to go join another office because I want my career in politics. It's very practical, it's very small, it is a slave mentality. The point is that that's not going to stop us. But this is what we need to do, and I think this has got to be the next step. Besides you calling everyone you can possibly call that's an elected official, let's mobilize an army of what we could refer to as the community leaders. You reflect that, you're participating, you're involved in the discussion, you're thinking. There are other people, there are county sheriffs, there are school board members, there are the major city councils in the various districts. These are the individuals that become state reps. These are the individuals that go from state reps to federal Congress. This is the base of the political process in the United States. And these are the people that if you start contacting, you will find those people who recognize that the bottom is going to drop out. As even people like Peter Schiff or, the guys from PIMCO all recognize we're facing hyperinflation, a complete collapse of the financial system, and this is going to drop, and it's going to drop soon, and it's going to drop harder than 2008. So let's find those individuals. And that's what we need to start mobilizing. All of you will be asked to come to Sacramento in the next few weeks. You will all be asked to participate in a major mobilization to storm Sacramento and to keep the pressure on them with the public display of support and of individuals who take the time out to get things moving. But right now, we need to create a groundswell of activity and discussion amongst the various layers of the political discussion in the entire state. Because California is significant. This is the largest state in terms of federal representation. Over 50 representatives in Congress. And if this state goes with the resolution, it will have a huge and major impact towards getting this legislation passed and forcing it into law. So it is significant. And we're going to face some obstacles because of it, same as we do in New York or Massachusetts, Texas, and Florida. There is opposition in all the major states, much as there was with the U.S. Constitution. So if we're going to take this, if you really want to participate in the process, we need to take it upon yourselves to begin to do this kind of outreach. Get over the pessimism. Get over the idea that nothing can be done. You run into obstacles, figure it out. Use the creative capacity you've been given to figure out how you're going to move these people. Because some people want to move. They see the crisis around them. They see the gun violence developing. They see what's happening with the federal government. They see what's happening with the financial system breaking down. Tom Harkin has a lot of farmers from across the country telling him, you're all going to die because you're not going to have any food. Not just the farmers. The farmers know that if they're not producing food, if they can't even have enough corn to produce ethanol, you sure as hell know you're not going to have food in the coming harvest. And that's the case. In Iowa, you've got places that are going into ghost towns, not because the farming shut down or the local industry, it's because the ethanol plant isn't producing ethanol because corn has collapsed in supply and the prices have gone up out the roof. That's the front line of what the crisis, the physical crisis that's coming and coming very quickly. And the financial collapse is nothing compared to the physical breakdown. So in terms of what we can do as marching orders, that's what you're asked to do. And you're asked to talk to the people that invited you here. There's a number, raise your hands if you're an organizer that should be contacted and talked to, in case you don't know. These are the people you can turn to, talk to at the end of this meeting. Find them, talk to them, ask them, what is he talking about? What do I need to do? Get the basic steps. Make sure that you can follow up with them when you run into problems. We need to mobilize, and we need to mobilize hard and now. We don't know what the outcome of Tom Harkin introducing this bill is going to mean. We found out yesterday, Friday morning. Everybody left Washington, D.C. by noon.
Couldn't tell anybody.
So you don't know what's going to happen. We know one thing, we've done a hell of a lot of work just over these last 5 months in Congress, really going back to about August and July when Mr. LaRouche said, get your asses into Washington, D.C. now, the situation's opening, and hit it hard. And it was. People know there's a crisis there. And as one person said it, people actually followed their moral conscience, that we'd have Glass-Steagall in law now. We've got to bring that moral conscience to bear. We've got to do it here in California, because we can. So that's the basic, I think, step now. If we do it and mobilize it as a groundswell of activity, we will see a consistent and continuing kind of crescendo of political activity. Not only on Glass-Steagall, you will see it on Obama. Because if people have in their minds there's a real chance to have a future, to create stability and security for the country and to begin to move forward, they will really despise him. A lot of people thought Obama was going to come out as the great progressive liberal in his second term. They said, well, he's got to play this game because he's got to get reelected. And he comes and he cuts Social Security and Medicare and the veterans and the military, and people now despise him. They're not just disappointed, they despise him. Give them an opportunity to do something different. And we got to do it on every level. I'm telling you, school boards, sheriffs, find the city councilors, find people who are, if you're in areas of like Oakland and inner cities, we talked to people yesterday at a gun violence special committee hearing on gun violence in Oakland. A lot of people there are working with young men who have, largely most of them young men, who have no future whatsoever. And they're going towards gun violence and drug use, these kinds of activities. And they're working with them on an on-the-ground, personal level to try to give them some sense of direction and orientation. What are they supposed to do with those young men?
What do they tell them?
How long can you catch him? Wait. We're going to get something going here. Nothing's going. They've got to get a fundamental shift in the financial system. Organize those guys. Organize these people who are on the ground trying to get something going. Because they won't know Glass-Steagall. And this is the thing. This is the most important point. People know we need a fundamental shift in direction of our country. And they might have heard of this weird term called Glass-Steagall, with a funny name. Do they realize that Glass-Steagall is a fundamental shift in the direction of the country? Do you understand that? They're not. The fundamental shift, yeah, we need it, and yeah, Glass-Steagall sounds like a good idea. Is Glass-Steagall the fundamental shift in the country, in the financial system? Will it change the entire international economic system? Yeah, it will. It can do that. That's the potential it has. This has got to be clear in the minds of these people. Especially for the ones who are in the trenches fighting the war every day, it's sometimes hard to see the larger concepts that will really shape what we become as a human species and a country. So that's our job. That's what we've got to communicate. And if we do it effectively, we will move people because they want to be moved right now. So that's the marching orders. So in that context, now you've got a bit more pressure. Are there any more questions for Harley to clarify anything? Or thoughts in general? Yeah.
Well, I think one of the difficulties is convincing people that there are other people that actually support this. And so seeing a visual representation of support, whether it be in, I don't know, online petitions or whatever, I think it would be important. So is there a place we can go to see, people signing on and people supporting these kind of things?
LaRouchePAC.com has on the top a series of icons, one of which is Glass-Steagall. And it lists all the congressmen who have signed onto the bill.
Right.
All the institutions and organizations, some of the, like Sandy Weil, the Financial Times, the New York Times editorial, it goes through all the support for Glass-Steagall. So that's something that can be printed out. I actually took that, I had a meeting with someone at the Federal Reserve Bank just recently who was saying, well, Glass-Steagall, I haven't heard that since I was in college. And I said, did you know there's a bill? No. I said, you're on the Federal Reserve Board, you don't know there's a bill on it? So I said, here, look at this. He said, holy shit. That has an impact. A lot of the representatives we talk to, they don't know there's a bill. They don't know that even in the Congress, people don't know. So yeah, that's a good starting point. And it's very effective, because then people will start going to the website to see if there's a change. What about my congressman? And so yeah, that's very useful. And it also has the language of the bill. It's very short, and it also gives updates. So that's something that you can use.
Real quick too, before, the other thing people can do is that you can begin to collect petitions. You can collect signatures from your area, from your neighbors, from your friends, from your church, from the organizations you're involved in. And you can walk into these district offices and say, it's not just me, it's 100 people I've talked to over the last 3 days. I did this 3 days ago, and now I've got 100 people who have signed on and said, this is what I want.
And here's something funny. We went out to a town in Louisiana, because there is a resolution for the Louisiana legislature. And one of the people who came up and signed it said, I really think this is a good bill. I've met you guys here a few months ago, and I studied it. I agree with this. I said, well, do you know anyone in the legislature? She said, well, my brother-in-law is the Speaker of the House. So they told her to get on the phone. Yeah.
What is LaRouchePAC's position on the fair tax?
The fair
The
tax.
fair tax and national consumption tax to get rid of the IRS?
Well, I think we have to get rid of the IRS. We do, it's a funny thing when people who are anti-taxes and cite the founding fathers don't realize that one of the first things George Washington did was put down a tax rebellion, the so-called Whiskey Rebellion, and he sent Alexander Hamilton with a militia there to go collect the taxes. So, we need to fund government. There are ways to do it so you can lower tax rates. For example, if you have more people working, you have people making decent wages. Plus, if the government is doing good things, people don't mind paying a little bit to the government. Now, I think the most urgent thing is break the power of Wall Street. Once we do that, we can debate what kind of tax policy. For corporations, for example, the investment tax credit. If you create jobs, then we'll let you take the money that you put into that off your taxes, as opposed to allowing them to go overseas and not pay any taxes. So there are a lot of things you can do to change the tax laws. But I think that's a secondary step. We've got to get the economy functioning again. Then we can figure out ways to reduce tax burdens or to tax those things that we don't want to have, like gamblers.
Yeah, I view it as a possible way to join forces and do both things simultaneously.
Well, you see, I think if in the short term, you'll pull more people into a tax reform issue just because people don't want to pay taxes.
Well, you're still paying taxes, but you pay them.
I know, but what I'm saying is you've got to think strategically. If we break the power of Wall Street and the City of London, then changing the tax laws will not be so difficult. If we don't break that power, whatever changes are done in the tax laws, you can be sure are going to go into your pocket and not into the corporations and the banks. So that's why I think Glass-Steagall is a weapon to take away the power of the financial interests. Yeah.
Reinstating Glass-Steagall and Obama getting out, what's to prevent the oligarchs from still placing a person that they want to control?
Well, look, people often say, well, if you impeach Obama, you're going to get Biden. I'll tell you one thing about Biden. He's a smart enough politician to know that if the Congress got rid of Obama for doing the things he's doing, that he won't do those things. You see, if you get an aroused population, things will change. Now, your question is actually a different question. Can we break the power of the oligarch? That's the issue.
Right.
And if you have sovereign nation states, that in itself breaks the power of the oligarchy. The power the oligarchy has right now is that they're forcing nation states to give up the protection of their populations for multinational globalist interests. They have to do that. That's the only way they can survive. If sovereign nation states exist and we say to British Petroleum, given your past record, we're not going to let you get oil out of our Gulf of Mexico. You begin to take down the power of the oligarchy. But most importantly, if you end the realm of speculation, where speculators can go to nations to get money from them to cover their losses, but they don't have to pay anything to help those nations. If you take that away, these financial interests are bankrupt. If you do an honest accounting of the too big to fail banks, they'll be put into bankruptcy and probably in the jail, the people who preside over these companies, because they're swindlers. Now, part of the problem is we never had in this period a real Pecora commission, similar to what we had in the 1930s, where a prosecutor went in and prosecuted the banks, showed their criminality. We had the Angelides Commission report, which showed there was criminal activity. We had the Regal Coburn hearings. And they recommended for prosecution leading bankers. It never went anywhere. So I think if we get Glass-Steagall, where part of Glass-Steagall is an audit of the banks, then you're going to find exactly what I've been saying, that these banks have been stealing from their creditors, the people who make deposits, to carry out illegal transactions. Now, in fact, it's even more than that. Bank of Hong Kong, Shanghai, they're laundering hundreds of billions in drug money, which they admit. How come no one went to jail there, and how come the bank wasn't broken apart? Because Eric Holder and his deputy, Lanny Brewer, said that our financial system is so fragile that if we put a big bank out of business, it could collapse the whole system. Therefore, we're going to have a deferred prosecutorial agreement, a DPA, which basically says, it's called the Holder Memo. Holder wrote a memo on this some time ago, and this is now why Royal Bank of Scotland and the LIBOR scandal has never been prosecuted. Do you know how many billions of dollars have been looted from cities because they were forced to buy these so-called risk instruments and insurance on their bonds? And then the rates were manipulated downward by the banks that sold them the instruments, and the instruments had a clause in the contract that if the interest rates go down, the cities have to pay more. That's fraud. No one's gone to jail for that. So if we actually had an honest accounting with Glass-Steagall, I think Jamie Dimon would be the first person to sign up for space travel. Or a lot of these bankers will go to Venezuela, where I think we still have no extradition treaty.
Well, a lot of these folks use the power of contract, which is in the document in trust, and this puts them separate from that.
Well, there are all sorts of tricks they use, but the fact is, if someone is a CEO of a company that's committing illegal acts, they can be held accountable.
Yeah.
And the problem is our justice system is giving them a way out, giving them an out. And there are some judges now who are protesting this. There was an agreement between the Securities and Exchange Commission and Citibank, where the Securities and Exchange Commission said Citibank violated the bank bonus law of TARP, and therefore we've got to do something. So what was done? They paid a fine that was about the amount of money that they made from the illegal violation. And the judge in New York City, after these agreements are signed, it has to go to a judge. Judge Rakoff in New York City said, I'm not going to allow this. Because he said the courts are supposed to rule on the basis of truth. And there's no truth stated here. There was no finding whether they committed a crime or not. So therefore, I'm not going to accept the deferred prosecutorial agreement. So the SEC and Citibank filed an appeal. The SEC filed an appeal. You know why? They said we don't have enough manpower or enough money to follow through in case we go to court. So it's better to get a little bit of a fine than to lose in court. So that's the corruption. But to defeat the oligarchy, we need to apply regulations and then laws. And again, an active population is the only way you're going to have this accomplished. But don't count on the courts or the politicians. The politicians and the courts have to follow the population that's committed to truth. So, any more questions?
I want to say that direct contact with your representative is very effective. And I think one of your staff was with me when I met with Senator Jerry Hill. And I wrote a letter to him on Glass-Steagall. And he called me. And I think we got a good commitment. But that, it's very effective. If you know them and they know you, they can put a face on it and it can be very effective.
Let me tell you something Congressman Walter Jones told us. I interviewed him on the LaRouche show. And he's one of the other patriots in this country. He's the one who, by the way, we just got a new signer on his bill that would make it an impeachable act if the president commits arms to a military situation without going through the Congress. There are now only four signers on a bill that usurps the Constitution. But anyway, Walter Jones said, if he gets a form letter, they don't pay too much attention. And so for those of you who sign form letters via email and send it in and think you're doing something, they may look at it, they may not. He said if they get a personal letter, they pay attention. If they get a couple of phone calls, they pay more attention. If someone comes into the local office, they pay a lot of attention. If they come into the Washington office, they pay even more attention. And I said, well, what's the best thing to get your attention? And he said, bring a whole group of people into my office. Now, I was making the point on a discussion the other day that we got the South Dakota legislature without having anybody who was really committed to the bill initially. And someone said, how did you do that? And I said, we got a guy up there named Ron Mazzara, who's very well known. He's been organizing in the state for years with us. He went door to door with a group of about 6 very burly, angry farmers. And everybody paid attention. The person I told this to said, yeah, but that's Hollywood. I said, no, it's not Hollywood. It's reality. Hollywood is thinking that you can send a letter to someone and they'll read the letter and say, oh my God, I didn't know this. I think I'll pass this bill. It's organizing. And organizing requires a commitment that goes beyond what most people are willing to do. But if we don't do it, we're going to see our nation destroyed and all of our lives will be shortened. If Obamacare is not done away with, there are people in this room who are going to die of preventable disease. Because they're now saying that we can't afford to keep people alive if they're sick, unless they can afford to pay for treatment. They're cutting back, they're closing chemo centers. I'm not a great advocate of chemotherapy. I lost my wife from lung cancer. And I don't think chemotherapy is a solution. But it does, in some cases, keep people alive. It does, in some cases, extend life. They're cutting it out of Medicare. And once they do that, in some instances, once they do that, the insurance companies will cut. They're cutting out heart medications. They're cutting out blood pressure treatments. They're cutting out kidney dialysis. There are now 5 states that have assisted suicide bills that have passed. In the state of, I think it's Oregon, they will counsel you that it's cheaper to commit suicide than it is to pay for your kidney dialysis. So we will pay for your assisted suicide, but not for dialysis. And when I was saying earlier that this is genocide and that they're lowering the value of human life to a price tag, that's the greatest sin of all. It's not that we're going to live forever, that we should live forever. Knowing that you're going to die is actually a good impulse to do some good while you're here. That's something we learned from Aeschylus' Prometheus. Prometheus is asked, well, what did you do for us? And he said, I took away knowing when you were going to die. And he said, well, why is that good? He said, because I gave you hope. You always hope you have more time to do something with your life. And that's something that we all have. But that's being taken away. Yeah.
I heard from a U.S. vet at a Planned Parenthood center that I was protesting that veterans are now being advised to stop taking their medications and just go.
Well,
Has anyone else heard that?
part of the sequestration is cutting money to the Defense Department. And some of those cuts are for VA hospitals, veteran medical care. And part of the Obamacare is to advise people that your quality of life is lessened when you get treatment. You're better off just living and dying naturally. And that's just a way of chiseling people into an early death.
Have you any association with the Frederick Douglass Foundation at all?
I'm not familiar.
It's, I just heard a man speak this past Wednesday. His name's Kevin McCarthy. And he was talking about, you mentioned Planned Parenthood. I didn't know, Margaret Sanger started that organization.
Yeah, Margaret Sanger was a genocidal.
She's a genocide. She mentioned genocide, so I thought, you know, and he was very, very, very passionate. I'm just thinking in terms, this is my first meeting of this group, but my sense is that you talk the same language in many ways.
You see, there are a lot of people who see pieces of the puzzle.
Right.
And, you know, 10 years ago, if you said that what they're doing with the healthcare industry is genocide, or what they're doing with these kinds of things is to reduce population with war, with other things, people thought it was crazy. Now, more and more people see that. And what we actually see, if you really look, Sanger comes from a traditional policy orientation, which goes back to Parson Malthus and the British, who argued that there are limits to population, and that we should not do something to keep those with lives not worth living. We shouldn't do things to keep them alive. Now, this found its organized expression, this idea that it costs too much to keep useless eaters alive. Who's a useless eater? Well, it could be someone who's, quote, terminally ill. It could be someone you don't agree with.
Could be black.
Yeah, so what that view was out there, including in the United States, with people like the Harriman family and Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. and the father of George H.W. And they funded Hitler through the Union Bank Corporation, including after we were at war with Germany. So the Nazis were the first ones to actually organize a systemic policy of eugenics, saying that some people are useless eaters, some people have lives less worth living. But that's now being institutionalized with clean medical terms, you know, cost effectiveness, you know, where they say in 9 out of 10 cases this treatment doesn't help, so we're not going to fund it in interest of saving money. What about the 10th case where it works? Yeah.
I was all gonna crash and walk out there in 81. Boy, doctor, I never walk, never talk, never be whole, give up, live your problems. I see chiropractors 3 times a week. Boy, this is mine. This is what I deal with American health care and sick care. No one's adjusted, nerves out of alignment, organs fail, get sick and medicate. Stupid diet, it's a sick diet, can be presented by saying your blood pH, vegetarian diet. I had no drugs, no medicine, in the coma, all natural healing. This doesn't work. So get natural, be holistic, seriously. Their bullshit, this bullshit doesn't work. We never want, you don't get a problem, they told you that. So it doesn't work, so do something different. And another thing about nerves to it first, and body pH, and food, know what you eat. Organic, raw, local, fresh, right, that's not food otherwise. And the body pH, check your body pH. The sick, like you cancer. Alkaline diet, calcium, by alkaline. So no one knows how to eat. Every night, an ad to eat, McDonald's, drug ads, bullshit. Excuse me. I died. I resurrected. This is a piece of shit. So do what you want to do. I'm going to be whole when I die. Thank you.
Look, let me just wrap the meeting up at this point by saying, look, I've been very happy with the discussion here today, the level of intensity and focus and thinking. But we've got to move with this. We've got to act on it. We have an opening now. Again, as LaRouche said, it's a time for cautious optimism if we don't screw it up. What does he mean by that? If you listen to a presentation, participate in a discussion, and then go home and say, well, that was interesting, and then don't do anything. That's how we screw it up. And what I would encourage is what Michael said, talk to the people here. Take a few minutes now to find out what we're doing, what the schedule is. I don't know the schedule in the Bay Area. I know we've got a lot of things we're doing. We've got a national conference here at the end of June. And one of the things we need is people to organize with us, to organize the legislature, the Congress, the local officials, and to bring your friends to meetings. Get other people you know who can think. Maybe they don't agree with you, but you'd like to see them get a kick in the rear end. Bring them to a meeting and contribute. We've got to have the funds to be able to have meetings like this. You know, unfortunately, it costs money for me to fly here, and it costs money to put out the intelligence that we put out. There are people in the institutions of this country who get their intelligence from our publications because they don't believe what they're getting in Washington anymore. Very few people, for example, know what General Dempsey is saying because it's never reported. He's working with the Russians to try and stop a war from breaking out because of our support of terrorists in Syria. So we need the funds, we need people organizing. When I say we, I mean the royal we, all of us. Because we're not just doing this for my benefit. We're doing this for the benefit of the nation.
Before, I don't want to be the last person to talk to that. I have a joke, and as long as the joke is seen as, there's a teaching point here, and the teaching point, I'll tell you before the joke, is there's meaning in things, and the powerful part of it is, as you have, several of you have suggested, you got to digest the meaning of things and then act based on the philosophy and so forth. But that takes weighing input and evaluating and deciding what you're going to do. But to illustrate the point of the power of an awakening, there's a joke. This little fella gets back from camp, and his mom says, well, Willie, what would you like for breakfast? He says, I think I'll have some of them goddamn Cheerios. And Mom reaches across the table, bang, knocks him clear out of his chair. Okay, and little Johnny, the little brother, sees this happen. He's awed. He's like, oh, wow. And he said, okay, what do you want for breakfast? And he says, I'm not sure, Mom, but I don't want any of them goddamn Cheerios. He's motivated, but that motivation has to be shaped in the real term.
I got another one for you. The guy goes out and buys a bird in the market for his wife that speaks 20 languages. So he brings it home, and then he goes back to work, and he comes home at night, and he sees a funny-looking animal cooked for dinner. And he asked his wife, what's that? She said, oh, it's that bird you brought home. He said, are you kidding? That bird cost $1,000. It speaks 20 languages. And she said, well, you should have spoke up before I started cooking it. All right, well, thank you, and let's get to work and get this Glass-Steagall in and Obama out.